fascinating listening to the speakers before me. I must confess that as an engineering undergraduate, a science student, a former finance student, a former investment banker, I'm a bit more vested in the notion of free markets and the value of technology probably than many. But I assure you that there is no inherent conflict between many of the principles I heard today and the notion that efficiency of information, equality of access to prices and transactions, as well as technical innovations like better solar generation or now offshore wind energy. These are not contradictory and they're all helpful to the broader notion. Because from my perspective, if I look at this maybe 2 or 3 ways. The first way is to return to a more natural way of life. By natural, I mean less waste generating, more self-sustaining, more full cycle product and consumption pattern. The second is to have a more equitable society where people have access to a good quality of life, and from the perspective of public goods and services, adequate potable water, clean environment, healthy kind of surroundings, access to medical care and so forth. And of course, quality education for all. And the third, in a more particular way, based on today's topic, is to assure a decent income and a sustainable career or a occupation for farmers who by definition are in the rural areas. I think if we take these one at a time, maybe I can just speak for about 3 or 5 minutes on each. We're running out of time. I think the advances in technology, particularly in medicine, the increase in the likelihood of survival, the longevity of people, led to a certain few centuries where there was such a rapid growth of population that the need for innovation, the need for the industrial revolutions, first, second, third, from steam and electricity and computerization, the need for mass production or the desire for people to have goods that were never available before. As someone once said, perhaps the greatest innovation in the quality of life came when there was running water and toilets that flush, more than anything else we see today. So, innovation has been happening at different levels for different times. But I think the life expectancy increase, the advances in medicine, the increase in the population, therefore, and the need for mass production to sustain this large population probably drove a lot of the industrialization of what is now, I think, sometimes considered a violent economy. But it served its purpose at its time. Where it started running astray is when you have those kinds of mass production, you end up automatically having stratification. You end up having very few very rich people and a lot of people who don't participate in the system. Now, the natural antidote to that was supposed to be the notion of democracy, that you transition away from monarchies and dictatorships and you transition to a place where, because it's one person, one vote, and not based on the value of the shares you hold in the enterprise or whatever, that you would find a more equitable outcome and you would find a way to have everybody participate in the process. And I think if you look back in history, you can certainly find stretches of, decade, 2 decades, 3 decades in some countries. In the US, for example, it was the post-Second World War decade till about the 60s. If you look at Europe, it probably lasted into the 70s, 80s. You had decades where, in fact, the model of democracy worked, that the increase in equity accompanied the increase in economic per capita assets or GDP or access to goods or access to health or access to education, access to quality of life. But I would say over the last 20, 30 years, particularly the globalization, the innovations in global finance, the integration of the economy on labor, on delivery of services through the internet, all of these have basically increased the stratification of wealth within almost every country. And so we are now again at a situation where the very purpose of democracy, of reducing inequality, of keeping everybody in the same system, has started to become a failure. I've talked about this a lot, but in this context, let me suggest that one of the ways that we think in our government we can do this, that's actually two. First, I'll talk about the micro and then maybe about the macro level. At the micro level, we see devolution and the localization of budgets, processes, authority, energy grids, waste management. All of these we see as a way of restoring equality to some extent. So, for example, we just announced a few days ago in Madurai a pilot breakfast program for very young children that the state sponsors. Unlike the lunch program, which we run as an industrial scale statewide program, the breakfast program consists of block grants to local bodies and the mothers of the children in the case of rural bodies, and the corporation using sophisticated technology that lowers the cost and increases the effectiveness and hygiene of production, while using equipment made by startups in Tamil Nadu of our bright young people. So we have taken a much more distributed approach to the breakfast program compared to the lunch program, just as an example. We also see the kind of microgrid model where each village using the solar technology can generate its own power and can employ the people that need to keep it clean and maintain, or for that matter, local wet waste management, where you can generate both fertilizer and energy through biogas. That also we think is a very good way of achieving both energy independence, low-cost production, devolution, as well as self-sustaining villages, and if you will, a more non-violent economy. We also see water management as becoming much more local rather than the centralized drinking water schemes. Actually, as a state and as a country, we're pretty very, very far behind, in fact, I would say, compared to the rest of the world in the extent of water recycling. And being naturally water deprived and volatility of supply, because the monsoon all comes, most of our rainfall comes in about 40 or 50 out of our 365 days. We need much better conservation, much more recycling, much better approaches to this. And rather than have mega projects, we can see a distributed model being much more effective. In fact, Tamil Nadu in some ways could be held up as an extreme case of de-ruralization, if you will. We are the most urban state in the country. Somewhere about 50% of our population already lives in urban areas. And unless we take conscious efforts to make the rural economies viable, we're probably going to continue to see that migrate. The projections we saw when we came to office was that in another 20 years, it'll be 3/4 of the population living in cities. And then, of course, life in cities will become very, very difficult. We can't nearly build infrastructure and evacuate sewage and waste and all to keep up with that. So I think at a micro level, we can see many different approaches. At the macro level, I think the government of Tamil Nadu is on a very accelerated push to go 100% renewable energy. The Prime Minister has set a target of 2070 for the country. I've said publicly that where Tamil Nadu is relative to the national average, if the country is going to be energy neutral or green energy by 2070, we probably need to get there by 2050. So, that's a very accelerated scale. But by God's grace, we have a lot of natural resources. We are already the number one renewable energy state in the country at something like 32-33%. We have wind, now we have new technology, offshore wind, wave. We're looking at stored hydro storage, pump storage up in hydro dams. We're looking at much better solar, because of the variability in solar energy generation, much better storage technologies. And there's a huge amount of capital around the world looking for such projects. So a state of our size, of almost 80 million people and a $300+ billion economy, even in FX terms, is a very good fit. And we think we'll be getting a lot of capital to do this. In fact, we have taken this lead in the last year or so of getting the most number of Ahimsa certifications for wetlands, for protected reserves, and we have an aggressive program to increase green cover. So even in that sense, we're trying to take the lead. As far as my Chief Minister is concerned, farmers and their livelihoods are very important, of primary importance. As you may know from when we came to office, our Chief Minister instituted a separate budget for the agricultural department. So my colleague, the Minister of Agriculture, for 2 years has been presenting a separate budget. As a farmer myself, I understand the complexities of actually achieving the goal of adequate livelihood to farmers. Many different approaches have been tried. Many approaches are susceptible to either natural failure or malfeasance. We have seen many cases where the notion of a minimum support price has not achieved the desired result. As a market participant or a former market participant, I'd say we have a basic problem in the food sector because both ends of the spectrum, the producers, which in a socialist country and state like Tamil Nadu tend to be small farmers, 2, 5, 10 acres, and consumers who by definition are single buyers or family buyers. Both these have low information and low purchasing or negotiating power. And the middlemen in the trading business have very much higher power, capital, and they can see both sides of the market. So actually, if you look at what we consider deadweight loss, that is the gap between what the farmer gets and what the consumer pays, then agriculture is one of the sectors where we have a huge gap. It's many multiples. Some of that, I believe, technology and electronic markets can actually alleviate that if organized properly. And certainly the government of Tamil Nadu will look at that. One last note of hope, I would say, our definition of rural livelihoods need to keep changing. There used to be a time when we thought that only farming and related occupations or support activities would happen in the rural areas, and a lot of white-collar work and high-end manufacturing and all that would only happen in urban or semi-urban or designated industrial estates and things like that. But COVID has taught us a few good things among the many bad outcomes. And one is that actually a lot of work can be done remotely. And I was just in Delhi a week or 10 days ago, and I had a conversation with one of the most dynamic entrepreneurs there who has built this huge company with billions of dollars called Atlassian. And they do a lot of software for collaboration and for publishing joint work and so forth. And what they have done after their learnings from the crisis, partly because they believe in their own tools and their own products, partly because they want to be pioneers, they have come up with this new work model called Team Anywhere. They say nobody has to actually come into an office. In fact, unless it's a headquarters or something, in most areas they will not have a physical office at all. They'll require you to travel so many days a month. They'll require you to operate out of some facility for at least so many days a year for all the benefits of integration and culturalization and so forth. But the notion is that you can do the highest and highest paid, let's say, software or software engineering work sitting in your house in some village as long as you have an internet connection. And as an example of that, the CEO of the company, which has about $3 billion of sales a year, he works out of his farmhouse some 50 miles outside Sydney and some 5 miles from the nearest Wi-Fi fiber cable. So he gets it beamed to him and he works out of his house. So I'm not saying it's going to come easy or it's going to come immediately, but this notion that you can now do almost any work from anywhere, I think will also be a way of revitalizing the rural economy. Because once you have such high-paying jobs with such value accretion, then you will start building a kind of demand market around that. They will need services, they will need goods, and there will be second order, third order effects if these kinds of jobs come to a rural area and incomes come to a rural area. So with that, let me say, I think that there are many ways to achieve an end. On principle, I'm all for the notions of this gathering that I think improving the lives and incomes of farmers of the rural area and making more equal societies and a more ecologically sustainable model of 100% or close to 100% recyclable products, goods, energy, services, water, I think is not, there's not a lot of opposition to that, at least if you have the basic compassion of a human being. But there may be many ways to reach that, and I for one think that there are certain technologies and certain approaches that will actually facilitate that. And of course there may be other ways of looking at it, but I think the future is very bright. I think the nature of human processes and innovation give me great hope. And we used to be a much more plant-friendly, less invasive species before. I believe we can be again. Thank you very much.